The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Pharisees came up to Jesus and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one'? So they are no longer two but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away?" He said to them, "For your hardness of heart Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry." But he said to them, "Not all men can receive this precept, but only those to whom it was given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it." The Gospel of the Lord. Dear friends, our relationship with God is covenantal, and so also the relationship with ourselves. Our relationship with God is a covenant between a human person and a divine person, as was explained in the first reading today. God planting a covenant between himself and Ezekiel, and by extension between himself and the children of Israel. Our relationship with one another takes three forms of covenantal relationship. One is the one that exists between siblings, parents, children. One is the one that exists between very good friends, and that's the one we can call the agape, the one that loves beyond boundary, where your sibling become your friend in Christ, your husband become your friend in Christ, your wife become your friend in Christ, your parents, children become your friend in Christ, and every other human being become your friend in Christ. And then we have the third one, the covenant of marriage, a relationship between man and woman. And so relationships are essentially to be covenantal in nature. And if we understand this, we'll first of all be very, very much careful about indulging in relationships in the first place. And when eventually we indulge in a relationship, all we should be thinking about is how to grow that relationship with the eyes of Christ. A lot of Pentecostals have advanced arguments that Jesus Christ permitted divorce on the account of, for some translations, they say fornication, for others, they say unchastity, and so on and so forth. And for others, they say adultery. But there is no permission of divorce at all, because what we need to understand the particular clause that is at the middle, where Jesus Christ said, except for unchastity, if you look at the entire chunk of teaching, it will seem as if I am personally suspecting that that particular phrase was injected into it because people couldn't just understand. How can you say man or woman or just remain like that forever? People couldn't understand. But if we look at the full chunk of the reading, look at the beginning. Jesus Christ made a declaration that from the beginning God has made it Now the man leave father and mother and be joined with his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two, but one. And then with the declaration, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Then they said to him, why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? And Jesus explained to them, it's because you were stubborn-hearted. So you don't just keep disrespecting women up and down, jumping from one man to the other. That was why I said, okay, you have to prepare a writ of divorce so that there will be respect in laying of the woman. And he says from the beginning, it has not been so. He says, whoever divorces his wife, that's where he now puts that clause, except for unchastity. And if truly that statement was not inserted, there is an understanding to that word unchastity. And marries another commits adultery. He who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, to show you that what Jesus Christ said was meant that there is no such thing as adultery, no such thing as divorce, the apostles themselves complained because that's so difficult. I mean, if that's the case, then there is no need to get married. It means somebody will just be a slave forever. Once you get married, it's forever and ever. No divorce, not even in any case, no divorce. Jesus Christ did not even excuse their fears. Jesus Christ made the case worse. And look, it's not everybody that should marry. In other words, this particular vocation is not a must that we all go into. Only those who are ready to treasure the foundations of marital validity. This is very, very strong. So if Pentecostals are hitting on just that one phrase that says, except in the case of unchastity, if they are hammering on just that one phrase, then the proportionalism is very poor, because the whole of this reading tells us nothing like divorce. Nothing like divorce. And then Jesus Christ said to the complaints of the apostles, it's not everybody that is meant to marry. If you know you cannot stick to marriage to the end, don't even put your hands at all. And then he says that at least not everyone can accept this precept, but only those to whom it is given. So it means it's not everybody that's supposed to be procreating. It's not everybody that's supposed to be in marriage. And then he said, there are people who are eunuch from birth. They are not meant to give birth. There are people who you can make yourself a eunuch. You can decide not to give birth. You can decide not to get married. If you discover that you will kill somebody because of marriage, don't get married. If you discover that you're going to be a worse person than single, don't get married. So these are people who can make themselves eunuch by themselves. And then there are those who are made eunuchs by other men. While there are those who are made eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. That is we, the priests. Now, let us come back to that phrase. In the original language of the Bible, you see where it's translated unchastity is also translated fornication. Fornication, not adultery. There are two different words for adultery and fornication. Now, it's like when Jesus was speaking, he said, no one should divorce the wife except in the case of fornication. What is fornication? Now, fornication takes the face of many meanings. Fornication underlies not just sex, not sexual action, because that is not what defines fornication, but that sexual action takes place outside of valid marriage. That is fornication. Fornication is not just sex in itself. Fornication is performing the act outside of a valid marriage. And so what Jesus Christ meant there, when he says that a divorce can occur, except for the case of unchastity or fornication. He is talking about the foundations of the marriage, not about an act of adultery committed in a marriage. By this, Jesus Christ, who said, no man should put asunder what God has joined together, God's joining together signifying validity of a marriage, that nobody can break it. If they say nobody can break it, it means there is no reason to break it. Which means there are reasons to break marriage. And he's saying, if nobody can break it, it means there is no reason whatsoever that can break it. And that reason includes adultery. Yes. Even if adultery is committed inside that marriage, it cannot be broken. Because adultery is a sin, like any other sin that is committed by the human race. And God has not destroyed us because of that. Nor has he abandoned us because we commit sin. And so he's putting that responsibility on us too. If I have not destroyed you because you have offended me, then you should not destroy your partner or destroy the sacredness of marriage because your partner had offended you. So the meaning of that statement there, saying that unless in the case of unchastity, Jesus Christ is actually saying, unless in the case of an invalid marriage. We have more invalid marriages in Nigeria than valid marriages. Can we count? Marriages that are not even blessed by tradition. You won't believe. There are so much. Marriages that are not blessed by the church, of course, that is uncountable. In the eyes of the church, marriages that are not blessed sacramentally are not recognized. It can be broken because traditional marriage does not have binding power like the sacrament of matrimony. So even if one has been married traditionally and he decides to divorce, the divorce is not seen as evil because that marriage was not sanctified by God. But the marriage that is sanctified by God, you should know this now, the marriage that is sanctified by God cannot be broken. Not even in the case of a partner committing adultery. There is no such thing as divorce. The only thing that exists in the church's law is an annulment of the marriage. Annulment means that I come with a partner before the altar, and within the terms of understanding, I say I do. Meanwhile, in my heart, I didn't mean those terms of understanding. I lied about those terms of understanding. Now, when the things that make marriage valid are absent, it is said that the marriage was not valid in the first place. And we can round it up to say the marriage did not even hold in the first place. Because a valid marriage is sanctioned by God. And it is a vow that is taken in front of the altar. When we come before the altar, we tell God, I take all the terms, spiritual and moral terms that are meant to make this marriage valid. And then if I now go after the marriage and it's now discovered that I perpetually abhor or I perpetually disagree with those terms that I came to take on the altar, that in itself has rendered the marriage invalid. That is where the church talks about nullity. There is no such thing as divorce. Once God has signed a valid marriage, no mistake on earth is meant to divide it. Now, for the sake of promoting peace, for those people who eventually discovered that, of course, of no fault of theirs, and they can't live with a particular partner, there is the advice for a temporal separation. Temporal separation means, we are still together in spirit, but since we are not compatible physically, we'll have to live separately from ourselves. In that state, either party cannot get married. It is a cross that we have to carry. The covenant of marriage is not a social contract. It's not a business contract. It is a spiritual contract. And the earlier we start knowing this, the better for us. Because it's going to help us train our children to understand the meaning of marriage. And it's going to help us discipline ourselves to settle down and be patient about marriage, and it's going to solve the myriads of problems of irresponsibility in relationships that are everywhere. But first and foremost, we should know that we have a covenant here, and a covenant should not be treated as a business contract that can be eroded.